when you were a kid and you actually went out and played? And it was normal? Oh, I yearned for those days. Bobbie McLaren has taken me back there in her book, The Sounds at River's Edge. Bobbie, thanks so much for coming on Author's Corner.
Well, thank you for having me, Kate.
So you heard what I said. It really is. You talk about the adventure. You talk about what happened growing up, really by the river's edge. Tell us what drove you to write the book. Why'd you write this book?
The world is so different now, and I'm 66, and at my age, you have children and grandchildren, and even at my age, many people are already great-grandparents. And there's stories about our lives growing up that the new generations will never experience. They'll never know. And my dad had always said that, unless you are famous or infamous, 100 years from now, people won't even remember that you existed. And I thought, man, that's really profound. So my dad had passed away in 94, and my sister and my best friend, Christine, had pushed me, and they said, you guys did the craziest stuff. You should write it down, because then you can leave a legacy that people 100 years from now, whether you remember it or not, the stories will be. And I thought, people need to remember there were simpler times. I mean, Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote The Little House on the Prairie. I read those, and I was like, man, thank God for microwaves. Thank God for hot water heaters.
No kidding, right?
Everybody's like, oh, it was such a simpler time. It was simpler, but yet it was not as convenient as what I'm spoiled to now. So that was the premise, and that's the platform to where the book came about. So I sat down and I wrote the stories and read them to my mother. And I said, Mom, do you remember this? And she goes, oh, my gosh, yes. So, I wanted to make sure they were really true. I even went to my sister and some of the other people involved, and they're like, yeah. So.
I love that. So, again, the book is The Sounds at River's Edge, True Stories. It's true stories of growing up on the Intracoastal Waterway. So we're talking about Florida. Tell us a story from the Intracoastal Waterway and growing up by that. Gators. You and I talked about gators. I have a fear of gators.
I love gators. If I could tame one, I would have one, but my cats and my other animals would be their lunch, so I don't have one. But I love South Florida when we were growing up, because it was so wild and it was so natural. And there's still areas of Florida that are like that. You go down to the Glades and stuff, and you still see that. But we lived on the Intracoastal Waterway right there in North Palm Beach, and I didn't even realize it was the Intracoastal Waterway until I was about 15. We always called it the canal. Now, a lot of people think of a canal as being something small, but you'd have to debate that with the people that live near the Erie Canal, because it's not small.
Right.
But it was the canal, and everything we did was based around water and outdoors. And you talk about, a story. One of my favorites in the book is The Demon Below. And it was where, even at a young age, which now you wouldn't let a child do that, but at a young age, like between 7 and 8 years old, I would take my fishing pole and I would head over to my uncle's house, which was quite a distance away, probably about 5 or 6 acres away. And he had a dock where he worked on large equipment. A man could do anything. And he had down there barges and tugboats, and because people would bring them to him from all over for him to work on the mechanics of it. And I went this one time down on the dock, and he had a small tug down there, which my dream had always been to be a tugboat pilot. It's like, those little boats have such power, and yet they're so small. Right. But I jumped down into the stern of the boat and, started fishing and everything, and I left my rod and went up into the pilot house and pretended for I don't know how long. I stayed up there for quite some time. And then I thought, well, I'm tired. I guess I'll go home. So I was reeling my line in, and all of a sudden I felt, I got something stuck. I thought maybe a shoe, something like that. And about that time, the ugliest, most grotesque face came up out of the water on the end of my line. And it scared me, and I screamed. And I threw my pole down, and I screamed again. And I jumped up out of the tugboat, ran up the dock, and was running toward my house, screaming, Daddy, Daddy! And I mean, and all of a sudden I thought, wait, I left my rod and reel. And I thought, no, okay, it's not that big. Daddy, I just kept running. And by the time I got to the house, my dad, who'd been in the garage, he came walking out to look to see, like, oh, my gosh, what's going on? And I ran up to him, and I was probably talking so quickly, he couldn't understand half of what I was saying. So finally, he said, okay, let's go. So we went over to the dock, and he said, well, come on. Well, I wasn't about to walk out on the dock. I stayed up on the land. Well, he went out on the dock, and he said, now, you're sure there's a monster? I said, I'm telling you, Daddy, it's a demon. Somehow I got a demon. There was a hole or something because, they come up out of the earth, and it's a demon. And he said, okay, all right. He said, now, come on. I said, no, I'll stay here. So he went out, and he jumped down into the stern of the tug, and he picked up my rod, and he started pulling, and he looked at me, and then he looked down at the water, and he stopped a minute. He looked at me, and he looked down at the water again, kept reeling in, and all of a sudden, he screamed, ah, like that, and I screamed, and I took off running. and all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, I'm running away from the person that was saving me. And I thought, what am I doing? And I turned around, and he was laughing like a maniac. And he had pulled up the most grotesque fish I'd ever seen in my young life. And he said, get down here. It's not a demon, it's a fish. Well, it took quite a bit of urging to get me down there, but I finally got down there, and it's called a rockfish. If you've ever seen a rockfish, I had caught jewfish and everything else. These rockfish have these, it would be like if you looked at a witch that had warts all over their face and appendages sticking out here and there, and it had this huge mouth. And I said, you sure that's not a demon? And he said, no, it's a fish. Look, it's got fins, and, we went through the whole thing. And it made me realize that sometimes we have a tendency with that story, the demon down below, we have a tendency to, our fears make us run to where we think is a safe place. But then if our safe place doesn't look as safe as we want, we run away, and then we realize, oh, my gosh, I'm leaving where I need to be. Because my dad would have never, ever put me in jeopardy.
Right.
But that was just, I was used to snapper and grunts and, sailor's choice and all those kind of fish. But I'd never seen anything like that. That was just the most gruesome thing ever.
Yeah, and I love your book.
He was there for me.
And absolutely, and your book is filled with those kinds of stories. It had to be fun to write. Was it fun to pull those stories together?
Yes, and it's still like I'm working on the follow-up to this one, More Sounds at River's Edge, and it amazes me the things that I put my sister through and she put me through, and how that either one of our parents survived. But my sister and I both decided that my dad must have been some kind of a little hellion when he was a young, because he tolerated so much with us and was so patient. And that, I think, only comes through experience of being.
Right.
You don't just develop that. You actually grow with that kind of understanding with relationships. So it was,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I love that you're carrying this over and you're doing more stories, because I think you're a good storyteller and people will appreciate that, Bobbie, about the book. But when you put this together, then you talk to your family about it. They laughed. You verified the stories, and so I love that you say that they're true stories, so people don't think they're made up. What do you hope somebody listening to us takes away from reading your book?
I would like for people to understand that, a lot of children grow up in homes that they don't really have a close relationship with their father. I was fortunate to where I can actually say that my dad was my best friend. The things that I thought that he was really stupid and dumber than dirt when I was young, as I grew older, I realized that he was probably the smartest man I ever knew. And in the book, I bring in a lot of my relationship also with my father, God, because kids that don't have relationships with their father, I think it's very hard for them to understand that there could actually be a God that loves them in spite of no matter what they do. And that's exactly what my dad did. My dad looked at everything we did, and it was like, you know what? No matter what you do, I'm still going to be here. And people need to know that there's someone in their life, somewhere, someone. If you don't have that person in your life right now, I believe that there is somebody out there that you'll come across that will stand by you, right or wrong, because that's the way that, truthfully, we're made. It's just that we get so wounded and we get so, things happen in our life, and we just get kind of tainted to where all of a sudden we don't believe. And I think that especially with everything going on in our world today, we need to have belief. We need to have hope. And I think that the stories that I share in here, they give people hope, because you know what? I survived all this stuff. I survived jumping off of the roof of my house as a 4-year-old with an umbrella, with no broken bones. I survived that. I survived growing up in the 60s and 70s, which were turbulent, and it's made me who I am today. The stories that we all share, whether they be good or bad, it can either make us better or bitter, and I choose to look for hope. And I believe people have that.
I love that. Better or bitter. And I still have that image of the rockfish, and we're going to take that away from this for sure, too. Here, stay away from the rockfish. It's so crazy. The Sounds at the River's Edge, True Stories of Growing Up on the Intracoastal Waterway. Bobbie McLaren, you can pick it up on Amazon. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Kate. I appreciate it.